What happens when the world's richest man meets a homeless girl with nothing but her dreams? This is a story of grit, hope, and the kind of innovation that changes lives forever. Stay tuned, because what unfolds will leave you speechless. Imagine this: a homeless girl on the streets of Los Angeles, her dreams buried under the weight of survival, crosses paths with Elon Musk, a man who builds rockets and redefines industries. But what happens next isn't about wealth or fame. It's about heart. This unexpected encounter sparks a chain of events so groundbreaking it captures the world's attention. What if one moment could transform a life and inspire a global movement? Before we dive deeper into this gripping story, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, Epic Story Moments, yet now is the perfect time. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an update, and be the first to hear our incredible new stories. Don't forget to like, share, and comment to support more heartwarming tales like this. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. Elon Musk cruised through the quiet streets of Los Angeles in his sleek Cybertruck. The city, usually alive with energy, seemed unusually subdued that evening. A gentle breeze carried the faint hum of distant traffic as he made his way down Sunset Boulevard. The truck's polished surface reflected the city lights, but Elon's mind was elsewhere, preoccupied with the challenges of his latest ventures. His thoughts were interrupted when he spotted her, a young girl, sitting on the cold concrete near a dimly lit convenience store. Her small frame was wrapped in an oversized hoodie, her legs tucked beneath her as she tried to shield herself from the biting cold. In her hands, she held a piece of cardboard with a hastily scrawled message: "Hungry and need help." Something about her struck Elon deeply. Vulnerability, mixed with a quiet strength, radiated from her in a way that was impossible to ignore. Without a second thought, he pulled over, the truck's tires crunching against the gravel by the curb. Stepping out, Elon approached her cautiously, crouching to meet her gaze. "Hey there," he said gently, his voice soft and unassuming. Startled, the girl looked up, clutching the cardboard sign tighter. Her large, expressive eyes reflected both weariness and curiosity. "I'm Elon," he continued, his tone warm but straightforward. "What's your name?" She hesitated, her voice barely a whisper. "Sophie." In that brief exchange, the world around them seemed to pause. A small crowd began to gather at a distance, their curiosity piqued by the sight of the billionaire kneeling before a homeless child. Smartphones emerged, recording the moment, but Elon remained unfazed, his focus entirely on Sophie. "Are you out here all alone?" he asked, concern lacing his words. Sophie nodded slightly, her eyes darting between Elon and the growing crowd. He noticed her trembling hands and the exhaustion etched into her young face. Without hesitation, he shrugged off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. The oversized garment enveloped her, its warmth offering a small reprieve from the cold. "Let's talk," he said, his voice steady yet kind. "I want to hear your story." For a moment, Sophie's guarded expression softened. A flicker of hope, faint but unmistakable, lit up her eyes. She hesitated, clutching the edges of the jacket as if it were a shield. Elon lowered himself to sit cross-legged on the ground, the towering Cybertruck behind him providing an almost surreal backdrop to the moment. "I'm not here to bother you," he reassured her, his tone gentle but firm. "If there's anything I can do to help, I want to know." Sophie's gaze shifted to the crowd of onlookers, their phones held high as they recorded the scene. "They're watching," she muttered, her voice barely audible. Elon glanced briefly at the crowd before returning his attention to her. "Don't worry about them," he said. "Right now, it's just you and me." His calm demeanor seemed to put her at ease. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen, not as an object of pity but as a person. Taking a deep breath, she began to speak, her voice shaky but determined. "My mom," she said, her words faltering slightly. "She got sick. We couldn't afford rent after that. I tried to keep going to school, but..." Her voice trailed off, and she looked down, tears welling in her eyes. Elon remained silent, allowing her the space to continue. After a moment, she added quietly, "She passed a few months ago. It's just me now." The weight of her words hit Elon hard. He couldn't imagine the strength it must have taken for someone so young to endure such hardships. His eyes traveled to her hands, raw and chapped from the cold, and the thin shoes on her feet, barely holding together. "I'm so sorry, Sophie," he said, his voice heavy with sincerity. "That's a lot for anyone to go through, let alone a kid." She shrugged, attempting to downplay the gravity of her situation. "I'm used to it," she replied, though her tone betrayed her struggle. "But sometimes it's hard to keep going." Elon glanced back at his Cybertruck, its futuristic design standing in stark contrast to the raw humanity of the moment. Then, as if driven by an instinct he couldn't ignore, he made a decision. "Come with me," he said, standing up and extending his hand. Sophie froze, her expression a mix of confusion and suspicion. "Why?" she asked hesitantly. "Because I think you're stronger than you realize," he said simply. "And maybe, just maybe, you deserve a break." After a moment's hesitation, Sophie reached for his outstretched hand. The crowd murmured in astonishment. But for Elon and Sophie, the world had narrowed to just the two of them. Slowly, she rose to her feet, still clutching the edges of the jacket. Elon led her to the passenger side of the Cybertruck and opened the door. Tentatively, Sophie climbed in, her movements cautious as though she were stepping into an entirely different reality. Once inside, the truck's warmth enveloped her, a sharp contrast to the cold she had grown accustomed to. She instinctively stretched her hands toward the heated vents, savoring the unfamiliar comfort. "You okay?" Elon asked, his tone light but sincere. Sophie nodded, her eyes darting around the futuristic interior. "I've never been in a car like this," she admitted, a hint of awe in her voice. "It's weird," Elon chuckled. "It's definitely not your average ride," he said. "But don't worry, it's just a truck, same as any other." A faint smile tugged at the corners of Sophie's mouth. For a brief moment, the weight of her circumstances seemed to lift. As they drove, Elon gently asked more about her life. "You mentioned your mom earlier," he said carefully. "Tell me about her." Sophie's gaze dropped to her lap, her fingers fidgeting with the frayed edges of her hoodie. "She was the best," she said quietly. "She worked 2 jobs, waitressing during the day and cleaning offices at night. She always said things would get better, that we'd find a way out of the mess." Her voice caught as she continued, her words tumbling out in a rush. "But then she got sick. At first, it was just a cough, but it didn't go away. By the time we got her to a doctor, they said it was too late." Elon's hands tightened on the wheel as he listened, his heart heavy. "When she died," Sophie went on, her voice trembling, "everything just fell apart. The landlord kicked us out because we couldn't pay rent. I stayed with a friend for a while, but her parents said I couldn't anymore. So I came here." The streets of Los Angeles shimmered under the glow of distant city lights, their hum punctuated by the occasional rush of passing cars. It was a typical evening for most, but for Sophie, a young girl wrapped in an oversized hoodie, it was another battle against the cold reality of her life. Seated near the corner of a dimly lit convenience store, she clutched a piece of cardboard with trembling fingers. The words "hungry and need help" were hastily scrawled on it, a silent plea that many passed by without a second glance. Her small frame, no older than 10, seemed lost in the vastness of the street. The hoodie swallowed her entirely, a shield against the cold and the indifferent stares of strangers. She tucked her knees to her chest, seeking warmth and comfort in the only way she could. Her thoughts were a swirl of memories, of her mother's laughter, the comfort of home, and the unbearable silence that followed her loss. Far away from her world of struggle, Elon Musk was driving his sleek Cybertruck down Sunset Boulevard. The futuristic vehicle's polished surface gleamed under the streetlights, but its driver's mind was elsewhere, deep in thought. Elon was contemplating the complexities of his latest projects, ideas that could change the world. It was then that he saw her, a small figure huddled on the sidewalk, her vulnerability illuminated by the faint glow of the convenience store sign. Something about her made him slow down. Perhaps it was the quiet strength in her posture, or maybe it was the stark contrast between her fragility and the bustling world around her. Whatever it was, he couldn't drive past. Elon pulled over, the tires crunching against the gravel. Passers-by stopped, unsure what to make of the billionaire stepping out of his futuristic truck. His tailored jacket and composed demeanor seemed almost alien against the backdrop of Sophie's world. Crouching down to her level, he spoke gently. "Hey there," he said, his voice warm but steady. "I'm Elon. What's your name?" Sophie looked up, startled. Her large, expressive eyes scanned his face, wary but curious. After a moment's hesitation, she whispered, "Sophie." The air between them grew still as their worlds collided. For Sophie, this was an encounter unlike any other. For Elon, it was a moment of clarity. He could see the exhaustion etched into her face, the chapped fingers gripping the cardboard, and the way her thin shoes barely held together. "Are you out here alone?" he asked softly. She nodded, her gaze flickering between him and the growing crowd of onlookers. Elon noticed the hesitation in her movements, the way she clutched her sign as though it were her last line of defense. Without a word, he shrugged off his jacket and placed it over her shoulders. "Let's talk," he said, his voice kind but firm. "I want to hear your story." For a moment, Sophie hesitated, unsure if she could trust the stranger. But there was something in his tone, a sincerity that made her feel safe. Wrapping the oversized jacket around herself, she began to speak. She told him about her mother, a hard-working woman who juggled 2 jobs to make ends meet. She described their tiny apartment, filled with laughter despite the struggles. Then came the illness, a relentless cough that wouldn't go away. By the time they sought medical help, it was too late. Her mother passed away, and Sophie was left alone to navigate a world that seemed to have no place for her. Elon listened intently, his heart tightening with each word. Here was a child who had faced unimaginable loss and yet carried herself with quiet dignity. Her resilience was humbling, a stark reminder of the disparities that existed even in the wealthiest cities. When she finished, Elon's voice was firm but gentle. "Sophie, you've been through so much, but you're stronger than you realize. And I want to help." He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. Together, they walked back to his Cybertruck, leaving the crowd murmuring in their wake. Inside, the warmth of the vehicle enveloped Sophie. She stretched her hands toward the heated vents, her small movements revealing how unfamiliar she was with such comforts. Elon drove them to a quiet cafe just outside downtown. The scent of fresh bread and coffee filled the air as they stepped inside. When the cashier asked for Sophie's order, she hesitated, unused to being offered a choice. Elon encouraged her gently, and she finally settled on a sandwich. He added hot chocolate and pie, ensuring she had a meal that was both filling and comforting. As they sat by the window, Sophie began to relax. The food warmed her, but it was Elon's presence that eased her guarded demeanor. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen. "Why are you doing this?" she asked suddenly, her voice tinged with suspicion. Elon leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "Because no child should have to grow up like this," he said simply. "I can't change what's happened to you, but I can help change what comes next." Sophie studied him, searching for any hint of pity or insincerity. What she saw instead was a determination that matched her own. In the days that followed, Elon made good on his promise. Sophie became the face of a new initiative, the Haven Project, aimed at providing sustainable housing and support for the homeless. Using Tesla and SpaceX technologies, Elon developed mobile units equipped with renewable energy and internet connectivity. Sophie's story captivated the world. Her image, wrapped in Elon's jacket, sitting across from him in the cafe, became a symbol of hope. Celebrities, activists, and ordinary citizens rallied behind the cause. Skeptics questioned Elon's motives, but Sophie's transformation silenced many critics. With access to education and mentorship, Sophie began to flourish. She rekindled her love for math, and under Elon's guidance, she started dreaming again. One day, she stood inside SpaceX, marveling at the rockets that had once seemed like distant dreams. "You said you wanted to be an engineer," Elon reminded her. "Let's make it happen." Years later, Sophie would go on to design systems that revolutionized housing solutions for the underserved. She became a voice for change, her journey inspiring countless others. For Sophie, the night Elon stopped his Cybertruck wasn't just the end of her struggles. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with possibilities she had never dared to imagine. And for Elon, it was a reminder that sometimes the greatest innovations start with a simple act of kindness. The spotlight glimmered on a makeshift stage set up in the heart of Los Angeles, not far from the street where Sophie had once sat unnoticed by the world. A crowd had gathered, their anticipation palpable. Among them were journalists, volunteers, city officials, and countless others who had followed the unfolding story of Sophie and Elon Musk. On the stage stood the man himself, a blend of his usual composed demeanor and something more personal, a sense of purpose. Beside him, Sophie shifted nervously in her new outfit, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. The clothes fit her perfectly, but what stood out most was the transformation in her demeanor. Her hair, neatly combed, framed a face that now carried the glow of hope. The shy flicker of confidence in her eyes spoke volumes, a silent testament to how far she had come. Elon stepped forward, addressing the crowd with a mix of humility and determination. "Today marks the beginning of something that I hope will grow far beyond this city, beyond this moment," he began, his voice steady but warm. "These mobile housing units are more than just a place to sleep. They're a step toward dignity, stability, and a future for those who've been left behind." He gestured toward the first prototype, a sleek, compact pod positioned near the stage. Its design was unmistakably futuristic, yet inviting. The unit featured solar panels on its roof, insulated walls for all-weather comfort, and thoughtful touches like a fold-out bed, a kitchenette, and even a built-in Wi-Fi hotspot. This wasn't merely a shelter. It was a reimagined lifeline, designed with care and dignity at its core. "These pods are a start," Elon continued, his tone resolute. "But this isn't just about technology. It's about restoring hope. And Sophie here," he turned slightly, smiling at the young girl beside him. "She's the reason this all began." The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers carrying a note of sincerity that resonated deeply. Cameras flashed as the reporters zoomed in on Sophie, capturing the moment that had already begun to inspire millions. Sophie looked out at the sea of faces, her nervousness melting away under the warmth of the crowd's encouragement. She managed a shy smile, her cheeks flushing slightly, but this time, she didn't look down. For the first time, she felt a sense of belonging, an understanding that her story mattered. The first 10 pods were deployed later that week, strategically placed in areas where homelessness was most concentrated. Elon's team had partnered with local organizations to ensure the units came with more than just shelter. Alongside them were job training programs, mental health resources, and education opportunities, all designed to help people rebuild their lives. Sophie was among the first to step inside one of the pods. She ran her fingers along the smooth surfaces, marveling at the thoughtful details. The kitchenette, the cozy bed, the natural light filtering in, it felt like a tiny miracle. "It's beautiful," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. Elon, standing behind her, smiled. "It's yours," he said simply. Over the next few weeks, Sophie began to embrace her new reality. She returned to school with a steady determination, her love for math reigniting with every solved equation. For the first time, Her dream of becoming an engineer felt less like a distant fantasy and more like a tangible goal. But Sophie wasn't content to just focus on her own journey. She became an ambassador for the Haven Project, speaking to other kids who had found themselves in similar situations. Her voice carried a resonance that no adult could match. Her story a bridge of understanding that gave others the courage to hope. Media coverage of the Haven Project spread like wildfire, reaching every corner of the globe. Stories of transformed lives began to emerge. A single mother reuniting with her children, a young artist rediscovering his passion, an elderly veteran finally finding peace after years on the streets. Each story added momentum to the initiative, turning skeptics into believers. Of course, there were challenges. Critics questioned the scalability of the project, arguing that systemic issues couldn't be solved with technology alone. Elon faced tough questions in interviews, but his responses were grounded in practicality. This isn't the solution to every problem, he admitted during a televised Q&A, but it's a start. And sometimes that's all people need, a start. Sophie's role in the project continued to grow. During a follow-up interview months later, a reporter asked her what she thought of Elon's impact on her life. She paused, choosing her words carefully. "He didn't just help me," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "He showed me that I mattered. And sometimes that's all it takes to change everything." As the Haven Project expanded to other cities, adapting to the unique needs of each community, Sophie remained its beating heart. Her courage and resilience became a beacon for countless others, proof that even the smallest spark of hope could ignite monumental change. Years later, Sophie would look back on that night when a stranger stopped his truck and listened to her story. It was a moment that changed everything, not just for her, but for the countless lives that would follow in her footsteps. And for Elon, it was a reminder that even the most groundbreaking innovations begin with a single, simple act of kindness. If this story inspired you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to believe in the power of hope. Like, comment, and subscribe to Epic Story Moments for more jaw-dropping tales that remind us humanity still has a heartbeat.